Feigned retreat, one of the oldest and most cunning tricks in the book. At first glance, it seems like a mistake. Soldiers turn and run. The enemy cheers, thinking they've won, their confidence rising as they charge forward, eager to finish the fight. But it's all part of the plan. In a feint retreat, a force pretends to break, feigning weakness, drawing their enemy in. The goal, to lure the opponent out of their stronghold, pushing them into overconfidence, and creating the perfect moment for an ambush. And when that moment comes, they stop, they turn, they strike back. Now, this tactic doesn't just take courage, it takes nerves of steel and supreme discipline. The soldiers in retreat have to remain calm, pretending to be defeated without actually losing control of the battlefield. Their hearts race, their bodies are exhausted, but their minds must stay sharp, knowing that at any moment they could flip the script on their unsuspecting foes. When executed correctly, a feint retreat doesn't just catch the enemy off guard, it breaks their spirit. And for the Romans, this tactic was a brutal tool in their arsenal. One of the first times the Romans truly experienced the power of a feigned retreat was in 262 BC, during the First Punic War, near the city of Agrigentum in Sicily. The Carthaginian general Hanno knew his enemy well. His Numidian cavalry charged at the Romans, engaging them in a battle they could win. But then something unexpected happened. They pulled back. They turned and fled just when the Romans thought victory was within their grasp. The Romans, thinking they had the upper hand, believed the retreat was genuine. They were eager to finish off what they thought was a broken enemy. Their cavalry surged forward, chasing the fleeing horsemen. They believed the day was theirs. But what they didn't know was that they were being led directly into the jaws of a trap. Just as they neared the retreating cavalry, Hanno's main army sprung into action. The Romans were caught off guard, surrounded by fresh enemy forces. They were ambushed from all sides. The battle turned in an instant. The shock wasn't just in the defeat, it was in the deception. The Romans had been fooled, their victory snatched away by the very retreat they'd thought was their prize. Imagine the confusion on the battlefield as Roman soldiers scrambled to make sense of what had just happened, their minds racing, trying to process how they'd gone from a certain victory to utter chaos. The once confident Romans were now in full retreat, running for their lives, but this time, they couldn't escape. Feigned retreats weren't just effective against the Romans. Far from their homeland, in 221 BC, the Greek commander Xenoetus, fighting for the Seleucid king Antiochus III, was marching against the rebel Mullen in Media. As his army approached, Mullen, the rebel leader, saw an opportunity. Mullen, like Hanno, pretended to retreat, pulling back his forces and making it look like his army was breaking. Xenoetus, with his eyes on victory, crossed the river and advanced with confidence. His soldiers relaxed. Some even drank from the river, letting their guard down, believing their victory was a formality. But Mullen wasn't done. He had been waiting for Xenoetus to make this exact mistake. The moment the Roman army became overconfident, Xenoetus and his soldiers were caught off guard. Mullen's forces, fresh and ready for battle, attacked with ferocity. The shock was absolute. Xenoetus, once confident in his victory, was killed. His entire army, now disorganized and panicked, was wiped out. The Romans weren't the only ones to fall victim to this brutal tactic. In Hispania, the Lucanians were masters of the feigned retreat. In 153 BC, their leader Caesar used the tactic to outsmart the Romans again. The Roman general Lucius Mummus was leading his forces against them, only to be drawn into a trap, much like the Romans had been before. Again, the enemy believed the retreat was genuine. They charged forward, expecting an easy victory. But when they were at their weakest, the Lucanians turned and the Romans were caught. It was a brutal reminder that the feint retreat was more than just a trick, it was a psychological weapon. It made the enemy believe they were winning, only to have their pride turn into panic and their strength into confusion. Sometimes, victory isn't just about strength. It's about outsmarting your opponent, playing with their expectations, and turning their confidence into their downfall. Discipline was the backbone of the Roman army. Without it, their incredible success in battle would have been impossible. But when the Roman generals needed to make an example out of their soldiers, they resorted to one of the most brutal and terrifying tactics of all, decimation. Imagine this, a unit of soldiers, brave men who have fought together through countless battles, but one of them, maybe just one, has broken ranks. Maybe he fled in fear, deserted his comrades, or failed to follow orders. The punishment for that failure was harsh and swift. Decimation meant killing 1 out of every 10 soldiers in a unit, chosen by lot. It didn't matter if a man had fought bravely or not. If fate fell on him, he would die. Not by the hands of a general, but by the hands of his own comrades, his brothers in arms. The process was simple, but the consequences were severe. The unit would be divided into groups of 10. Each group would draw lots. The unlucky man, chosen by fate, would face his death at the hands of his own fellow soldiers. And it wasn't a quick death. The man was clubbed or stabbed to death by the 9 soldiers closest to him. His comrades, those he had fought beside, were forced to carry out the execution. There was no escape, no mercy. Once the punishment was carried out, the survivors of the decimated unit were subjected to even more humiliation. They were given reduced rations, often nothing more than barley instead of wheat, and forced to sleep outside the safety of the camp. Their shame was complete, but so was the message. One of the most famous examples of decimation occurred during the Third Servile War when Roman general Cassius failed to defeat Spartacus. He blamed his soldiers for their failure and demanded they be punished. Hundreds of soldiers, who had once been his comrades, were killed not by the enemy, but by their own brothers in arms. Mark Antony, too, used decimation. After a disastrous defeat in Media, his soldiers had lost their courage, so he punished them in the Roman way. The men who had survived battle now faced the harshest punishment of all. The price for failure was too high to ignore. Even early Republic generals like Gaius Claudius used decimation to maintain order during the Volian Wars. It was a tactic that shocked their enemies, who couldn't fathom that Roman soldiers would be forced to kill one another, all in the name of discipline. For the Romans, decimation wasn't just a punishment, it was a tool of control. It made sure that no soldier would dare break ranks, knowing the consequences could be fatal. It kept the legions in line and reminded them of the price of failure. And for their enemies, well, the shock was real. To hear that Roman soldiers could be executed by their own comrades just for disobeying orders was a terrifying concept. It proved the Romans' commitment to maintaining control, loyalty, and order at all costs. While other armies feared death in battle, the Roman soldiers feared something far worse, the consequences of failure. For them, the most dangerous enemy wasn't just the foe across the field. It was the possibility of letting their brothers down, knowing that even a momentary lapse could cost them everything. War elephants, massive, terrifying creatures that could trample anything in their path. To face them on the battlefield was to stare down the raw power of nature itself. Their size, speed, and strength made them nearly unstoppable, and for many armies they were the ultimate weapon. But the Romans, ever the masters of strategy, found a way to fight back. They didn't rely on brute force. Instead, they turned the elephant's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. At first, the Romans were just as intimidated as any other army. The first time they encountered war elephants in battle, during the Pyrrhic Wars and Punic Wars, they almost broke under their power. These enormous beasts could crush men, horses, and anything in their path. But the Romans weren't intimidated for long. They learned quickly that head-on confrontation with elephants was a losing battle. Instead, they adapted and devised a plan that would turn the tide in their favor. Rather than attack the elephants head-on, the Romans targeted their legs and eyes, vulnerable points that were hard to defend. The Romans used spears and arrows, striking quickly and then retreating before the elephants could retaliate. By focusing on these weak spots, the Romans began to cripple the elephants. Their thick skin might have been hard to pierce, but the Romans knew that even the largest animal could be brought down if you struck in the right place. Next, they employed another clever tactic, creating gaps in their formations. Rather than allowing the elephants to charge through tightly packed lines, they created narrow passages for the elephants to pass through. The elephants, confused and out of control, would run through the gaps without causing the devastation they were meant to bring. Once the elephants were behind the Roman lines, confused and exposed, the Romans struck from all sides. They knew that once the elephants lost their momentum, they could be easily surrounded and neutralized. But the Romans didn't stop there. They also used the elephants' own fear against them. As powerful as they were, elephants were still animals, and animals can panic. One of the most bizarre yet effective tactics the Romans used involved fire. They would cover pigs in flammable pitch or tar, light them on fire, and send them charging toward the elephants. The sight and smell of the flaming pigs, combined with their terrified squeals, sent the elephants into a state of frenzy. In their panic, the elephants often turned around and ran back into their own lines, trampling their own soldiers in the process. It was a horrifying, yet effective strategy that turned the mighty war elephants into a source of chaos for their own army. And if that wasn't enough, the Romans also dug trenches and placed sharp spikes in the ground to stop the elephants before they could even charge. These obstacles would wound or slow them down, making them far less effective. The effectiveness of these tactics was proven time and time again. At the Battle of Beneventum in 275 BC, the Romans defeated King Pyrrhus of Epirus, using open passages and side attacks to neutralize his elephants. And at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, during the Second Punic War, Scipio Africanus used similar strategies against Hannibal's war elephants, causing them to panic and wreak havoc on their own forces. The Romans had learned the key to defeating the seemingly unstoppable force of war elephants. They didn't fight them head-on, they outsmarted them. They used precision, fear, and adaptability to turn these colossal creatures from fearsome adversaries into mere pawns in their larger strategy. By turning the tide of battle with tactics like these, the Romans proved that no enemy, no matter how big or terrifying, was unbeatable. And in the process, they reshaped the very nature of warfare. In 52 BC, Roman general Julius Caesar faced one of his most ambitious and shocking siege tactics, something so daring that it stunned both his enemies and his own men. The place, Alesia, a fortified hilltop town in Gaul, home to the rebellious Gallic leader Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix had taken refuge inside this hilltop fortress, surrounded by thousands of warriors. Most generals, faced with such a stronghold, would have launched a direct attack. But Caesar wasn't like most generals. He was known for his patience, his calculated strategy, and his boldness. Instead of attacking the fortress head-on, Caesar made a daring decision. He decided to build not one but two walls, one to trap the enemy inside, and another to protect himself from reinforcements outside. Caesar ordered his legions to surround Alesia completely, cutting off any hope of escape or reinforcements. His men constructed a massive line of fortifications, a circumvallation stretching for 16 kilometers or 10 miles. This wasn't just a wall. This was a monumental feat of engineering, built with ditches, wooden walls, towers, and traps. The outer wall was lined with 23 towers, manned by Roman archers and slingers, ready to strike at anyone trying to break through. The Romans didn't leave anything to chance. Every inch of this perimeter was designed to prevent any attempt at escape. For Vercingetorix, it was a nightmare. No way out, no reinforcements coming. But Caesar didn't stop there. He knew Vercingetorix had already sent riders to call for reinforcements, and he wasn't about to let that happen. So Caesar ordered his men to build another wall, facing the other direction. This was a contravallation, designed to protect the Roman army from outside attack. This second line of defense was just as impressive. Trenches filled with water to stop cavalry, walls topped with battlements and spikes to ward off attackers, and even hidden pits to slow down any advancing forces. Caesar was trapping Vercingetorix between two walls, like a lid on a boiling pot, and he wasn't about to let anything escape. Caesar's men dug deep trenches, some filled with water to stop cavalry. Others were lined with sharpened stakes. There were hidden traps, pitfalls, and obstacles to slow down any would-be rescuers. The Gauls inside the fortress were trapped, but so were the Romans outside. To make matters even more complicated, the terrain around Alesia wasn't flat. It was uneven, full of hills and valleys that could provide cover for the enemy, but Caesar had anticipated this. He ordered the construction of a massive earth ramp, a huge dirt mound that allowed Roman siege towers to roll forward, bringing their attack directly to the enemy's walls. With his 2 lines of fortifications, Caesar had not only trapped the Gallic forces inside, but also set up a shield against any hope of relief. He was going to suffocate them slowly and methodically. There would be no escape, no salvation. But Vercingetorix wasn't done yet. He was waiting for his reinforcements to break through and save his people. But when they arrived, they found themselves blocked by the outer Roman wall. They couldn't break in, and the trapped Gauls couldn't break out. As the days went by, the situation grew more desperate. The Gauls inside Alesia tried to break free, but every attempt failed. With no way to escape and no reinforcements coming, their strength began to falter. Caesar had trapped his enemy with patience, engineering, and perfect execution. The siege continued for weeks, but eventually the Gallic forces inside Alesia had no choice but to surrender. It was a complete victory. Caesar had won not just with his strength, but with his brilliant mind. By building 2 walls to fight 1 battle, he had completely shattered the last major resistance in Gaul. Caesar's double siege at Alesia stunned both his enemies and his own men. It was a strategy so bold, so daring, that it would become one of the most famous tactics in Roman military history.